There's a segment of voters who like can't be reached now because they've kind of cut the cord, don't have cable, and you can't reach them.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, the home of campaign tech innovation on the right. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, you're joining in on a conversation with entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. On today's episode, we're taking a look back at the stories that shaped the world of digital politics in 2023 and are setting the trends as we head into 2024. These are all stories that I drew from my weekly newsletter, Learn, Test, Optimize, which has a rundown of the most important stories each week from the world of digital politics and campaign tech. Subscribe to Learn, Test, Optimize at learntestoptimize.com if you aren't already signed up to receive that free weekly email. To help me break all of this down, I'm joined by Mitchell Porwal, digital strategist at Invictus Strategies. It's a new fundraising firm that we're all going to be learning more about in the coming year. He was previously head of marketing at WinRed. Mitchell, the first big story that we're diving into is on the state of online fundraising, which is obviously, near and dear to your heart. So coming off of 2022, when we saw some signs that online giving was softening, there was lots of introspection about reassessing our fundraising tactics. We had a few episodes about it here on the podcast. What's driving this slump in online fundraising for campaigns?
Yeah, so I think we've continued to see the slowdown in 2023 for both Republicans and Democrats. I think it's important to note that it's on both sides. And so there's a few factors driving this, in my opinion. The first one being inflation. The rate of inflation is currently slowing, but Americans are still paying a lot more for things like groceries than they were at the start of the Biden admin. That's just a fact of life. The second part of this is Facebook ads are less effective, right? Tracking restrictions, ATT put on by Apple have made targeting harder. That hurts prospecting and retargeting efforts.
Yeah, because Facebook has been such an important part of our email list building and getting people into our funnel for donations, right?
Yeah, you look at the Obama campaign and then the Trump campaign in 2016. There were tons of articles written about both of their uses of Facebook to find donors and voters on both sides. So that hurts. It means that people have to focus on retaining the donors they do have, because it's going to be a little bit harder and more expensive to find new donors.
Yeah, and I think we've also seen kind of an oversaturation of our existing donor pool, to your point. And that's in no small part to the work that you did at WinRed, getting more Republicans to start using online fundraising. And so you had a little bit of a kind of the same phenomenon we saw with COVID, where there was a supply and demand mismatch where more people, more candidates and campaigns are asking for money online, but there are fewer people to give. So there's a little bit of an oversaturation of some of the tactics we've seen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you think about it, people are being asked to give constantly, really since 2020. It hasn't stopped. So yeah, campaigns committees have to find new ways to stick out in those crowded inboxes on those among the dozens of texts people are getting. It makes it harder. Campaigns got to find a way to get more creative to kind of cut through all the noise.
And I think another challenge that we face is that the tactics that work. So, I often talk about how we've just digitized direct mail tactics with email. And so that's where you get some of these hyperbolic email asks, the 1500x matching, all of that kind of stuff. I think people are burnt out from that as part of that oversaturation, because in order for that to work, you have to keep pushing it. And at a certain point, it just becomes absurd.
Yeah, I think if you're telling donors you have budget problems every month, they may start to think that you have a larger issue potentially. So I think, nonprofits have done this really well, in my opinion. They have, they create content and has some value to the donor, whether it's 5 key things you need to know about election integrity, or a roadmap for governance, stuff like that. I think campaigns can adopt some of those same principles, and that works for acquisition, but also cultivation. Thanking a donor for their support, being like, hey, here's my plan. What do you think about it? Let them respond to you. It doesn't always have to be an ask for $10, $20, or $40.
Right. I was really excited about the RNC making grassroots donations a requirement to be on the debate stage, because in some of our research from the Center for Campaign Innovation, we saw just how powerful for the Democrats that effort in 2020, when you were bringing in tens of thousands of new donors to the ecosystem. They were maybe fans of Kamala Harris. They were fans of Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, Cory Booker, Bernie Sanders even. You were bringing them into the Democratic donor ecosystem, and they were sticking around. So we saw that in 2022. So I was really hopeful that the requirements that the RNC put in place would be helpful. I think it certainly forced campaigns that otherwise wouldn't have done that to focus on grassroots outreach. I unfortunately don't think that it expanded the donor pool so much as they went after the same group of donors and competed in that and sort of shut other people out. So it didn't have as much of the outward evangelism, if you will, but it started to put the focus on it, and hopefully they stick around. But I do think that there is kind of a general lack of enthusiasm in the grassroots donor base right now of the potential of a Trump-Biden rematch, which is something they've seen before. Remember, voters are consuming politics as entertainment more than ever before. And this is, for all intents and purposes, a rerun. So I think all of that combined, I think it's always tempting. People want to say, oh, it's inflation, or it's this one thing. It's because we send people too many texts, and that the reality is it's more complex.
Exactly. It's never just one thing. It's always a combination of things. If it was just one thing, it'd be really easy to fix.
So we obviously identified that as a problem. What have we seen folks try over the course of 2023? One thing that stands out to me is the Nikki Haley campaign. John Hall, who was on an early episode of the podcast this year, talked about some of the things that they were going to try. And I think they really stand out in terms of the content-driven updates that they're sending out, especially over text messaging. Curious to see if there are any other, campaigns that have stuck out to you.
Yeah, they were one of the main ones that I was seeing. John Hall and Ken Micah both had great posts earlier in the year about kind of making a better donor experience for people that really stood out. And then, Ron DeSantis's campaign launch, or like his launch campaign, it was really focused on telling donors that they wouldn't be treated like ATMs, that their donation mattered. They weren't an ATM, and they wanted them on Team DeSantis. That was along the same lines as the Haley content too, I think, which is great. It's great to see that kind of stuff. Also on the platform side, WinRed did release personalization features. You had Ryan on a couple weeks ago, and all that's geared around towards kind of a better, more personalized donor experience as well, and hopefully better fundraising.
Yeah, that is interesting. Going back to the DeSantis campaign, they really did break that fourth wall of campaigning where they were talking to the supporters about campaigning. And that highlights something that has really stood out to me over several of our post-election surveys that we've done through campaigninnovation.org, which is fundraising solicitations are actually becoming one of the biggest forms of voter contact that we have. So basically, Republicans and Democrats and independents are all getting hit up for money. As we know, the kind of copy, the messaging that works for fundraising is not in line with the message that we want to have to soft Republicans, independents, or persuadable Democrats. And so it really does stick out as like, okay, people get the joke on the fundraising. I think one of the challenges, we just don't have a new business model. And so that's why I'm always really interested in what's going on with Substack, what's going on with Patreon, OnlyFans even, of how do you build those relationships with fans and create content that way, and then monetize it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you look at like the nonprofits again, like they have like programs where it's, you give it a certain level and you get a monthly, teletown hall with whomever. It takes more work on the campaign side for sure. It takes staff time. It takes, time for the principal to do all that, but you're probably going to see the results pay off and the lifetime value, the retention, all that stuff that you need in those late, the late part of the cycle.
All right. So prediction time. Do you think online fundraising bounces back in 2024, or are we going to, for the first time, see less money raised in a presidential cycle than the preceding year?
I think it'll pick up from this year, but I do think it probably will be lower for both Dems and Republicans from 2020. I hope I'm wrong. I do. But that's just that's my gut. I'm usually an optimist, but that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it may come back. I think if anything, if we're looking at total numbers, the major donor spending usually levels things out on both sides. But I am curious if the sort of economic pressure that people are feeling continues to, obviously political donations are one area that is easy for people to cut back. I do think that there's an under discussed thread going on behind the scenes, which is raising money more efficiently. And I know a lot of committees and big campaigns are starting to talk about their net fundraising rather than just the gross fundraising. So for listeners who may not be familiar with this, the number that gets reported is how much money we raised, right? How many donations did we receive? That doesn't take into the cost to raise that money and that net donation. And so you are starting to see a little bit more of that. So recognizing that, okay, that total may not increase, but we got to get more juice from the lemon, as it were.
Yeah, I had that in my notes too. It's kind of like inside baseball, but I think it's really interesting in the campaign vendor relationship. If the focus moves off of gross raised to the net raised and what's actually available to, power the ground game, to power the advertising, like, is that a shift in fundraising tactics overall also? Do they help each other out?
So Mitchell, another important story that has played out this year with really major implications for 2024 is the continued restrictions of political advertising on various platforms. There's not a single social media company or advertising network that hasn't put in place restrictions or even bans on political advertising in the last couple of cycles. So you and I have been dealing with Facebook and Google verification requirements for a while. That's pretty old hat for folks. But this year, we've seen more kind of outright bans. Notably, Microsoft has pulled back from the political advertising space. Netflix has announced that when they do roll out their ad-supported version of their platform, they're not going to allow political advertising there. On social media, TikTok has been very forceful in no political advertising, limited political activity organically. What does this all add up to in terms of impact for 2024?
Simply, it makes it harder for you to reach the people and voters you need to reach, right? And the Netflix ban really hurts because such a large user base is now kind of unreachable. Campaign Innovation, your survey talked about how there's a segment of voters who can't be reached now because they've kind of cut the cord, don't have cable, and you can't reach them.
It's a real problem, obviously, for us as practitioners, but there's the issue of the United States is a country where political parties and campaigns drive turnout. I've worked in other countries where turnout is just naturally high and campaigns' responsibility is to get out their message. That's not the case here. And so, kind of cutting off our ability to reach those voters means that we're going to see lower turnout, I think, because of it, because people are just able to tune out politics more easily. And, you think about Netflix and streaming, we really thought that streaming was going to be the answer to diminishing linear TV. And it's not playing out that way. So I think it's a big wake up signal for people.
Yeah, I guess from the company's perspective, they see it as, we're just going to ban it and that's our easy way out. We give up some revenue on the top line and we don't have to worry about this whole election thing. There's no bad press about us in the future. We're just we're free from it. The problem is, like you said, less people are going to vote. And that's not great for America.
Yeah, it was. It is definitely I'd say the easy way out. So let's analyze it from the perspective of, does this solve the problem that they're going after? So the challenge is we face a lot of blowback when we make decisions about political content that is on our platform. So the left criticizes us when there's stuff that the right does, and vice versa. So their solution is, well, we're just going to avoid those tough decisions. Well, fine. But there are unintended consequences to the public good. And I think it really raises some interesting questions about how campaigning is going to be done in this country going forward, as more of our public square, the places where we discuss, are owned by private companies. And I think it does, unfortunately, miss the mark in solving that problem that they're trying to address.
Yeah, it just makes things more fragmented, right? Campaigns will adapt, but it's hard. And when you've done things a certain way for so long, it's hard enough to adapt with innovation. It's even harder when it's you actually just can't use this at all. And it's okay, in that case, where do we go now?
Yeah, we're still going to be the only thing propping up the United States Postal Service are political campaigns, right? In light of this trend, what do campaigns need to be doing to prepare in 2024?
So I think it's pretty simple. Or basic, but map out a plan. Who are your core audiences? Who are your core personas? How are you going to reach them? How are you going to get your message out to millennials? How are you going to get your message out to Gen Z, to Gen X, or whoever? Are you going to use traditional, linear Are you going to use digital ads? Are you going to use OTT and streaming? And are you going to supplement some of these bans and restrictions with a larger ground game, more door knocking, stuff like that to hopefully compensate for some of that? And then like the biggest thing I think we have a problem with is like, how are you measuring your progress or success? Like up to election day is the ultimate decider, right? You either win or you lose. But up until then, when you're talking about like resource allocation, which is at a campaign's core, how are you judging that you should keep investing in linear, or you should pull back on linear and invest in more door knocking and more like in more of your ground game? Those are the things that campaigns, I think, need to think about to make sure that they're successful in 24.
Yeah. Two things I would add to that. One is be suspicious of these platforms. I think you always need to have an escape route because, I mean, we've just seen how they've pulled the rug on people very last minute, middle of a campaign cycle. So I think, one, I would just be very suspicious about over-indexing for any one platform or company or ad network. And second, I think we need to reassess the campaign media strategy, which for a long time has been about like filling up buckets. So you sort of say, okay, I'm going to fill up the TV bucket and make sure that that is spilling over. There's nowhere else I can. And then I'm going to go into cable. Okay, we'll fill that up. And then streaming, you know, maybe you get onto a Hulu or something like that. What we're seeing in our research is that you actually need to spread it out very broadly to start and then increase. Because what happens is, you know, on TV, you are kind of in the first sort of tranche of ads that you do, you're reaching that audience and you're getting them. The more that you put there is not reaching new people, it's just reaching those same people over and over again. And so I think it does take a little bit of a mind shift of like, okay, we're not filling up all the media buckets. We're trying to spread our water around to get coverage on everyone.
Yeah, it's kind of like testing into things, right? Like let's go a mile wide and 2 inches deep, and then let's see where like the pockets are. We can like go strike gold. Then let's like dig deeper over there.
You're listening to the Business of Politics show. And on this final episode of 2023, we're breaking down all of the top trends shaping the world of campaign tech and digital politics as we head into the 2024 presidential election. I'm joined by my friend Mitchell Porwall to help me break down these stories. So Mitchell, let's talk about influencers. The creator economy continues to be big business. And like I mentioned, we're seeing these platforms like Patreon, Substack, and yes, OnlyFans gaining steam as more traditional media and entertainment businesses and their models falter. Some of the more ascendant political figures are using the creator economy style playbook to fuel their rise. Obviously, AOC was really early on this. Jeff Jackson from North Carolina really made a name for himself using TikTok and Substack. And Vivek Ramaswamy has really been bold in how he's putting himself forward as a content creator first and foremost. So one of the major stories that I've been tracking this year, and I think will be a key factor in a 2024 Biden reelection if he's successful, is the outreach Democrats, especially from the White House, are doing for these social media influencers and content creators. They've done a number of collaborations. So we saw the Jonas Brothers were there doing a promotional message, I think, for COVID vaccinations. They've got a virtual briefing room. And at a panel recently, one of the White House staffers mentioned that they have a staff of 20, a team of 20 people dedicated to creator outreach. Obviously, that's new. It's stunning. Let's focus first on what's the risk for the White House in outsourcing their campaign message like this. Obviously, it's smart to get it out, but they have less control this way.
Yeah, I mean, the risk is that one of these influencers goes off message and winds up in a controversy of their own. Like the Daily Caller story about the Senate staffer who was fired over the weekend, right? He apparently also appeared in a 2020 Joe Biden TV ad. So like stuff like that just happens to like pop up after the fact and isn't always great.
I mean, that's the trade-off, right? You get access to these people's audiences, but you're giving up control. And to that, I usually respond, well, you lost control in the first place. Like those people are still going to be out there saying those things. The question is whether you're part of it or not. And so I do think that there's, kind of a campaign communications culture that needs a shift of, okay, we're not responsible for everything that everyone who has ever been on our campaign says or does, but it does open up campaigns to more opportunities. And if you think about the game that these influencers and creators are playing, it's like they've got to keep getting more eyeballs, which means that they've got to be more outrageous. So it's bound to happen, but I don't see the alternative.
No, they have a relationship with a dedicated audience, and they have this trust built in with that audience. That is extremely valuable. You saw a couple of weeks ago the Bin Laden Letter to America article, right? And a couple influencers on TikTok went out and said how Bin Laden was correct. I don't believe that. He was wrong. But then you saw it just take off like wildfire. And it was crazy to watch on like a Friday night. People start believing that this letter was correct about America. And it's like, it is crazy how much sway they have. Now, will one post change the world? Probably not, but it's there. The option is there. It's possible.
Yeah. Do you think that these influencer marketing tactics, which we've seen are really effective on these direct consumer brands, can they shape public opinion, drive behavior, that sort of thing?
I think they can. I think if you get enough of them, and the Biden team, they had that Christmas party for them last week with, I don't know, like 100 or something. That becomes an echo chamber. I think that can move public opinion. I think the traditional media used to do that, but now with everything fragmented, we have influencers kind of filling that spot, talking to their own niche audiences and taking that role. We've
kind of gone away from the day of Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw, where the trusted voice that everyone looked to, and now we all have our sort of panoply of voices. On our side, on the Republican side, what's going on with influencer outreach, creator marketing, that sort of thing?
If you're on Twitter, you probably see a lot of influencers fighting over their preferred presidential candidate every day. That seems to be what a lot of them focus on day to day. Republicans, we have our own personalities and influencers, but I think there's a key difference between ours, at least from my point of view, and the Biden ones. A lot of the Joe Biden influencers got famous by doing non-political things. They're inherently non-political figures. I think on the right, a lot of our influencers that we would look towards are political. They came up in the political sphere, and their audiences are also political. So the Joe Biden audience may be new. It may reach a new voter, may convince a new voter to vote for him. Whereas I don't know that our influencer audiences are reaching anybody new. And that's kind of like the big difference on each side, I think.
Some of the things that we're seeing, we've made an investment in a company that's working on creator outreach and influencer marketing that helps campaigns do that in a more accountable way. Kind of a cost per action model. I do think there's a big question mark of, okay, you've got this big audience on social media. It's okay for you to have left-wing political views, but is that going to translate to success for your audience? Because there are some people who just say, look, I'm following you for makeup or sports takes or whatever, but I don't want to hear where you stand on politics. I do think from a kind of a low propensity, low information voter, I think it's going to be critical. And hopefully Republicans get in the game soon.
Ideally, we got to test things to see if it works at the end of the day, right? Yeah. You can't just like seed the ground to the Dems and be like, that's their thing, not ours.
Right. So for our final topic, of course, I feel kind of like one of those one-hit wonder bands that waited until the encore to play the one song everyone knew. We have to talk about artificial intelligence. So AI blew up in a big way in 2023 as ChatGPT and large language models became more widely available. The concern about deepfakes in politics has been around a while, but this new AI tech is more accessible and advanced at the same time. And so I think efforts by the media to declare 2024 the AI election are premature. We're still seeing AI used mostly as a gimmick by campaigns to get earned media. So that's usually a sign that it's not really that impactful yet. The more widespread AI uses that I'm seeing on campaigns are more mundane, like helping to write email drafts, social media copy, analyzing data, or supplementing creative with new stock photos or repairing some images, that kind of thing. Mitchell, what do you think about the moral panic we've seen around the use of AI in campaigns? Is it hype or cause for concern?
You saw my eye roll. It's for me, it's the typical news cycle, right? It's all the doom and gloom. And to be fair, there aren't a lot of movies or books where AI is the hero. It's usually some dystopian thing. So like we're kind of trained to think that like it's like very bad. So it's easy for a news cycle to kind of like just run that way. And there are concerns, as you mentioned, like with deep fakes and bad actors. But that's with everything that we have to deal with. So overall, I don't think there should be as much of a moral panic. I'm optimistic about AI overall, not only in campaigns, but like just for Americans in general. It won't be smooth sailing, but like that's just the cost of innovating at the same time.
Yeah, and I do think it is really helpful to sell newspapers or get people to click on links if you talk about, oh, this horrible thing might happen. And we're seeing that even lawmakers are starting to introduce legislation to ban stuff that's not happening yet, banning artificial intelligence from political communications. And you kind of dig into that and say, well, what about Photoshop? What about editing a video? It's not strictly speaking AI, but same kind of concept. So I think a lot of people are just kind of ginned up over this for no reason. Because I mean, the point I always go back to is every instance of artificial intelligence being used in campaigns that we have seen has been disclosed. People brag about it. So it's not like someone's trying to slip it by. I think the closest we came is there was a clip that I think the Trump campaign was circulating with like voiceover that was so absurd. It was obviously fake, but NBC News sent out their cease and desist letter. I think one thing that I hear a lot of people ask me about in conversations, they feel like they're late to the party on AI. Have they missed the boat?
I don't think so. AI in general has progressed a ton in the last year, right? From like the ChatGPT-3 like explosion to now. And politics is typically late to the tech game anyway. Like regular companies haven't figured it out quite yet. But I do think the next 12 to 18 months are going to bring some like great advances on both sides and like really show what the use cases are, hopefully outside of just, drafting some email content. But at the end of the day, the question is like, one, does the tech work? Is it making your content better? Are your workflows better? Your results better? And if it does, then great. Like use it, adopt it, and like go head in. If it doesn't work, just drop it. Like simple as that. Don't try to force it into your workflow or into your campaign if it's just like making you like worse.
Yeah, I think that's probably the trick is just play around with it, figure out how it works. This is sort of my opinion of crypto and Bitcoin, right? Web3, obviously very exciting new technology, lots of possibilities, boom busts aside. But AI is going to be the same way. When it goes in the background and we don't know that something is AI or we don't know that it's crypto, that's when it has gotten the adoption of people. So I think there's still time to get on board. It's very early innings yet. How do you think we'll see campaigns practically use AI in 2024? It may not be as big as everyone expects it to be, but what are we expected to see?
I think we're going to see more of the same. Like you mentioned earlier, it's drafting content, it's maybe analyzing some data, making gimmicky ads that are clearly gimmicky. That way the earned media is like a bigger thing. I think that's where it is in 2024. After that, I think is where it gets really exciting personally. But with all of this AI stuff, the advertising policy changes, fundraising challenges, all this stuff is also an opportunity for new platforms, new products. And this disruption is what's going to help us find new ways to break the status quo, to, unlock new solutions and find new ways to win. Like that's what I'm excited about is what comes next. Because I think it's going to be really, really great for us.
I think the biggest potential for AI for campaigners, and if I'm on a campaign, the thing I'm going towards is how can I use AI to remix all the content that I'm creating so I can fill all these different channels, using AI to rewrite a press release into a blog post, into an email, into a X thread, turning it into a podcast script, all these sorts of things that would previously have taken up a lot of time. Now you've got AI to help out. So that's where I think we're going to see most people use it, where it's trying to make themselves more efficient, because we're not getting more money, we're not getting more time. So you've got to figure out how to squeeze everything you can.
That's exactly right. I totally agree.
Well, my thanks to Mitchell Porwal for joining us today. And if you want to stay on top of all of the news heading into 2024, make sure you subscribe to my free Learn, Test, Optimize newsletter at learntestoptimize.com. If this episode made you a little bit smarter or gave you something to think about. All we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague. You look smarter in the process, and it helps more people find the show. Remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics show wherever you get your podcasts, and see past episodes, get email updates on our website at businessofpoliticspodcast.com. Thanks for listening. Happy New Year. We'll see you next time. The Business of Politics show is produced by Advocacy Content Kitchen, a media production studio.